Good morning. I'm Balasubrahmanian from Chennai, and I'm delighted to be part of this extremely important and exciting gathering of Ayurveda conversations. I'm not a Vaidya by training, I'm a Vaidya by inclination and interest. And I had a non-profit group in Chennai called Center for Indian Knowledge Systems. The focus of our work is that we have been working for about 40 years on sustainable agriculture. I met Krishna Kumarji around the year 1982, more or less around the time I got interested in this area. Subsequently, as late as 1995, we formed an organization, a trust called Center for Indian Knowledge Systems. Krishna Kumarji was one of the founding trustees of this organization, and he continued to be there with us and supporting us in his capacity as a trustee right till the very end when he departed and left us just a couple of years back. One of the areas in which he took a lot of interest and encouraged me was with my efforts, explorations, experiments broadly in the area of what I would call as Vriksha Ayurveda, that is to say, Ayurveda for plants and trees, as against the larger subject of Ayurveda for human beings. This is an area in which I took interest, and he was very curious, interested, supporting, and encouraging. And on more than one occasion, he has called me to gatherings of Vaidyas and gatherings of students to talk to them, to bounce ideas, and to take inputs about Vriksha Ayurveda. One of the more recent ones was the Tattva Prakashini gathering about 6 or 7 years back, where they invited me to talk to the students as well as faculty. So, in the context of today's workshops that you are having, one of the broader themes is Ayurveda and ecology and ecosystems. So, this has a particular overlap, or I would say that there is some sort of a linkage between this theme and Vriksha Ayurveda. So, I'll make a presentation to you today on Vriksha Ayurveda, and I'm grateful for various links and encouragement that were provided for me by Krishna Kumarji through the ages on this subject. Now, let me share with you a few slides where I have tried to put down an overview of what I want to say on this theme. Help, I'm not able to get this to the full screen.
All going well, sir?
I'm not able to get this slide to the full screen. I need some help.
What about now?
Yes, I got it to the full screen. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm ready to resume.
Please go ahead.
So here I am. I have to share with you slides that I have prepared on this theme of Vriksha Ayurveda and the future of Indian agriculture. So this is the outline of my presentation. I'll first going to talk to you about the source material of Vriksha Ayurveda and give an introduction. Then I'll go on to talking about testing and validation as well as utilization of Vriksha Ayurveda practices. Then talk to you about some unique Vriksha Ayurveda approaches. And lastly about how and what it means to head towards an agriculture that's based on Vriksha Ayurveda. Now, all of us know that Ayurveda, in a broad sense, is the science of life that deals largely with human beings. But there are sub areas of Ayurveda. One of them is Mriga Ayurveda, that is veterinary science or talks with Ayurveda for animals. And then another is Vriksha Ayurveda, that talks about Ayurveda for plants and trees. To begin with, let me give you an overview of what is the source material relating to Vriksha Ayurveda. In a broad sense, we have classical literature, or what we call as Shastriya Parampara, and also folk literature, or what we call as Lok Parampara. Classical literature contains texts and manuscripts that are published or as books. They have a clearly spelled out theoretical framework, and the fundamental principles of the Shastra are drawn from Ayurveda. They are the same Panchamahabhut Siddhant, Tridosh Vichar that form the substratum or theory of Ayurveda. In terms of classical texts, we have various categories. We have Puranas and Samhitas, we have general texts, and then we also have texts that are specific to Vriksha Ayurveda. And I'll give you a few illustrations. For example, there is a well-known Sanskrit text called Surapalakrita Vriksha Ayurveda, that is Vriksha Ayurveda, that is authored by Saint Surapala. Then there are other texts like Krishi Parashara, Kashyapya Krishi Sukti, and so on. There are also texts in various Indian languages. For example, there is Krishi Gita in Malayalam and Lokopakara, that's a Vriksha Ayurveda text that is in Kannada. Now, what is the scope of Vriksha Ayurveda? As a student or scholar of Ayurveda, if you ask me, what are the types of things that Vriksha Ayurveda deals with or talks about? This is an illustrative list. Vriksha Ayurveda talks about collection, selection, and storage of seeds, germination and sowing, various techniques of plant propagation and grafting, nursing and irrigation, testing and classification of soil, and selection of soil suitable for various plants or types of plants. It also talks about manuring, pest and disease management, nomenclature and taxonomy, favorable and unfavorable meteorological conditions. What are the tithis, varas, or nakshatras that are suited for specific operations? Plants as indicators of weather, water, and minerals. And there are also certain aspects which you may today call as marvels, botanical marvels that they talk about. In general, the Vriksha Ayurveda approach is very same or similar to the Ayurvedic approach with respect to plants and health. Vriksha Ayurveda tells you about how we can promote good health or growth. And plants in health have Prakriti, just as in the case of human beings. Then Vriksha Ayurveda talks about pests, diseases, and injuries, very similar to Ayurvedic approach to human beings. And Vriksha Ayurveda tells you that plants have a natural constitution like the human beings. For example, the Vata constitution plants typically are slender, tall, they are light in weight, they are rough on the surface, and we similarly have characterization of Pitta and Kapha Prakriti plants. For example, this is an illustration or a picture of a typical Kapha constitution plant. It has stout and thick stems, plenty of leaves and branches. It has abundant fruits and flowers. Now, similarly, Vriksha Ayurveda also talks about characteristics of plants that are affected by particular doshas. For example, it says that if a plant is affected by Pitta dosha, it has yellow or discolored leaves. Oozing occurs in fruits. There is languor of leaves and flowers, and it has an appearance of aging prematurely. And any student of Ayurveda will recognize the parallel to the human examples, just as the kind of symptoms you see in Kamala, which is a Pitta affliction. And sometimes there are young people who have grey hair, and people would say, look, he's not old, it's a Pitta Narai, we call it in Tamil. It's a symptom of age that is due to a Pitta affliction. And the Acharyas talk in a very similar sense about Pitta affliction of plants. How do you treat plants? For example, if a plant is affected by Pitta, you can irrigate the soil with substances which are predominantly Shita, Madhura, and Kashaya Rasa, like cow's milk, very similar to treatment of a human being. Now, apart from the Shastriya Parampara, there is also Lok Parampara, or what you call as folk literature. Where can you find this? There's plenty of folk literature in popular magazines and newsletters. There are publications in technical peer-reviewed journals as well as PhD theses. There are also special compilations. Interestingly, one such special compilation has been even made by the Indian Council of Agriculture Research, and I'll give you some details about it in just a few slides later. There was an interesting testing validation effort that was taken up by ICR, that's Indian Council of Agriculture Research, a few years back. I'll talk to you a little bit about it. Then I'll talk to you something about efforts taken up by my organization, Center for Indian Knowledge Systems, and also efforts by various other organizations. Now, the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, about 20 years back, they did a survey and documentation of traditional practices relating to agriculture from the field, farmers' fields. They produced a total of 7 volumes, including 1 volume on documentation and validation, and they documented a total of approximately 5,000 practices. They published a series of volumes of this kind. To the left, you have a cover page of a volume, which is an inventory of indigenous technical knowledge in agriculture, which is a document 3. On the right side, you have a volume that talks about validation of indigenous technical knowledge in agriculture. What is the contents of these volumes? If you take a look at one of these documentation volumes, you would see that they have classified practices in 19 different categories. Those relating to things like rainwater management, methods to check soil and water erosion, pest and disease management, grain and grain storage techniques, and so on. What the ICR did was very interesting. They selected 111 of these 5,000 odd practices, and they gave it out to a set of researchers from Krishi Vigyan Kendras, agriculture universities, and institutes of agriculture of the Government of India, and asked them to subject them to testing or validation as per the modern scientific criteria. We have done a meta-analysis of these results. Our analysis shows that out of 111 practices tested, an astounding 86%, as per this research, have been proved valid. About 2.7%, according to the experts, are partly valid, and about 2% of the results are to be repeated. They say that about 9% of these practices are not valid. So what we are really finding is that of 5,000 odd practices that were documented, when you pick a subset of about 111 practices and put it to testing and validation, an astounding nearly 90% of them are proved to be valid. This is something which is a remarkable testimony to the validity of some of this traditional knowledge that has still survived down to this day. Now, use of Ayurveda, I'll give you a few illustrations of certain types of experiments and experiences from various sources relating to topics like pest control, seed treatment, coming out with a package of practices for various crops, storage forms of biopesticides, and also tell you about how we get an insight that Ayurveda has a common approach underlying plant, animal, as well as human health. About 25 years back, the Center for Indian Knowledge Systems, where we operate from in Chennai, were approached by the garden superintendent of Theosophical Society in Chennai. Theosophical Society has a huge campus of 300 plus acres along the Adayar River. It forms a part of the estuary of the Adayar River. There, the garden superintendent told us they had a serious problem for controlling what they call as what we identified as mango leaf webbers. The symptoms are that the larvae web the leaves and completely feed upon them. The leaves wither and dry up. The infestation period is starting from April onwards. It is higher in orchards with lesser spacing between trees and in shady areas. It was completely finishing these plants. So these people said, we are not interested in using any harsh chemicals. We heard that you are doing sustainable agriculture using natural products. Can you help us? We said, well, why not we try to put some of our Vrikshayurveda knowledge into practice, and we made a suggestion which I have summarized here. We suggested and implemented a treatment where we say that you take a mixture of neem oil and pungam oil, which have the properties of being crimigna. You do a spray, then you also do a fumigation with a mixture of two herbs, Daruhadra and Vayuvadenga. The results were that the plant growth was enhanced and then it started yielding fruit again, and the yield was very good. This is the first time that we had experimental verification in the field in a large area of Vriksharada practices that we have studied from farmers' fields as well as the texts of Vriksharada. In the subsequent years, we went on to put to test an experimental verification a large number of such recipes and wisdom from Vriksharada. For example, you take something like seed treatment. What we tried out was treatment of seeds by fumigation with specific herbs like vacha and vaivadenga, soaking in milk, as well as recipes such as soaking in cow's urine which is diluted and panchagavya at suitable concentrations. All these are mentioned as prescriptions for seed treatment, either in the Granthas, texts of Vriksharada, or we found in farmers' practices. We also fabricated a fumigation device where to the right you see a fumigator, in the middle is a heater, and the left is a blower, so that on a perforated plate in the fumigator, we could spread a thin layer of a large number of seeds, and then we could drive fumes that go through specific herbs that I mentioned in Vriksharada text. We found these to be extremely interesting and effective. Subsequently, we have also worked on developing package of practices based on Vriksharada for various crops. They are based on textual knowledge of Vriksharada as well as farmers' practices. Just to give you an idea, we have brought out a large number of publications on this theme. For example, to the left is the cover of a poster set that we have brought out on organic cotton cultivation. We also similarly produced a user's manual Vriksharada for plants, both in English as well as in Tamil. We have brought out monographs of this kind, neem because it's very important. A user's guide to neem and how it can be used for agriculture. Similarly, we have brought out an entire publication on organic paddy cultivation. Some of the other aspects of Vriksharada that are very significant for agriculture, I'd like to share with you. One of the research themes that we have taken up is searching for new biopesticides. How do we search and try to identify plants or natural products with biopesticidal properties? One is that we can get clues from texts. The Brihadrayis as well as various Ayurvedic texts, they have plants that are classified according to the guna or the properties. For example, there are plants that are classified as being having the property of crimigna. Similarly, we also have a lot of clues from farmers' practices. We have worked on these clues, screened many of these plants on a variety of crops, tested it against a variety of pests, looked at various types of dosage, and also looked at various forms for using these. We have also worked on storage forms of biopesticide based on Ayurvedic approaches, and I'll give you a little background as to why this is important. Now, we have a lot of Ayurvedic products that are for immediate use, like Swarasa or a fresh juice, or Kashaya, which is a water decoction, just has a lifetime or a shelf life of 4 to 24 hours. Then there are storage forms of Ayurvedic products like Churnam. Arka distillate is something that may have a shelf life of a few years. Taila or oil may have a shelf life of again from a few months to a few years. Asava and Aristas, fermented products as well as Sharas, have long shelf life ranging from several months to several years. Now today the challenge is, if you tell farmers that you can control some pests or use a plant product You take so many kilograms of vodka, so many kilograms of something else, you boil it, filter it, spray it. An entire generation of farmers that's used to chemical pesticides may very rightly ask you, can't you make this easier? In the case of chemical pesticides, we just buy a bottle from the shelf, empty it into a tank, dilute it, and spray it. So we were wondering, is it possible to look at an Ayurvedic approach to provide a shelf life for some of these products? What we have done is we have worked on storage forms of natural products. These are ready-made alternatives which are similar to chemical pesticides. They are cheap and effective. The availability of plant extracts is throughout the year. For example, here is a case of Pudina Arka. Now, the advantages of the Ayurvedic approach is that these are non-polluting. There is no requirement of toxic or corrosive solvents or chemicals. For example, starting from neem oil, if you were to get a storage form like Neemasal or Nimbidicine or something like that, you have to do a chemical processing using high temperature, corrosive solvents, high pressure. None of that is required with this Ayurvedic approach. The process is low cost. Many of these products can be prepared on a small or a large scale. Most importantly, the technology for preparation of things like kashayam, thailam, or arishtam is very widely known to our people. One other aspect that we realize working in an area like Ayurveda is how Ayurveda gives you a very interesting underlying common approach to plant health, human health, as well as animal health. I'll give you an illustration. Several years back, we were dealing with this problem that we have with this problem with this plant ash gourd, Benincasa hispida, which we call in Tamil as Pusani or Venpusani. It's called as Kumbalaka in Kerala or Kushmandam. One of the problems that farmers encounter is there is a withering and dropping of flowers. There is plenty of flowering. There is no proportionate fruiting. The fruits will wither and drop away. Now, there is a very interesting gardener's home remedy for it. They would say that you take a piece of hing, peringayam, what we call as Ferula asafoetida, you dig near the root, put the piece of hing and irrigate it, it will be fine. We have actually tried this and we find that there is a remarkable improvement. What is very interesting is transformation of fruits to flowers is governed by the functioning of Vata. Imbalance of Vata leads to withering and dropping of flowers, and hing helps in correcting the regulation of Vata. Now, what we understand is that there are very interesting parallels to this in veterinary and human medicine. Hing is also known to regulate imbalance in ovulation and reproductive function. Farmers administer hings in cow that do not get into heat. The hing has a very strong taste, so farmers usually bury that or mask the taste by putting a piece of hing in something like a banana and feed it to the cow. Similarly, in the case of humans, there are Ayurvedic formulations which contain dravyas that are garbhasthapaka or garbhaposhaka. In women and in families, sometimes there is a tendency for repeated abortions. So, what we see from this is some of the Dravyaguna considerations are very fundamental. They run across human life, animal life, and plant life. And it's not a great surprise because the Panchamahabhutas or Tridosh Vichar is really applicable to all life forms. Now, if we say that there is so much of wisdom, knowledge, practices that are based on traditional Indian agriculture and Vrikshayurveda, is it possible for us to move towards an agriculture that's based on Vrikshayurveda? Let's stop here and ponder a little bit in terms of what I see as sources of possible weaknesses, what are some strengths, what are some of the efforts that we are required to make, and what could be the returns that are possible. What are the weaknesses? One of the weaknesses we see is that the folk tradition or the Lok Parampara is weakened. There is no classical or Shastric tradition that is strong. For example, when there are a large number of texts on Vrikshayurveda, like in the Brihattari, there is no great set of Ayurvedic scholars who are very deeply knowledgeable in these texts of Vriksha Ayurveda. The translation of textual prescription into practice poses gaps and problems. For example, if you're an Ayurvedic physician, if you're preparing medicine, you would know that if you want to prepare something like, say, Chavanaprash, the best way, or indeed the only way to do it, is that you have to work with someone who has done it for years or generations. If you just pick up the Grantha, read the slokas, and try to go to the factory floor and make Chavanaprash, it will take years and years mastering the finer details of it. So there's always a challenge if there's no Lok Parampara to translate the text directly into practice. There are a large number of texts of Vriksha Ayurveda which are not readily available, and high quality Ayurveda input and involvement is difficult to obtain. What are the strengths? The strength is that existence of a parampara, however weak, is a great blessing. In fact, every single farmer who has some exposure and some background to Lok Parampara in agriculture is really a walking Lok Parampara of Vriksha Ayurveda. There are applications and solutions that may possibly be of great commercial value. Experiments are easier to design and perform in comparison with human or animal subjects. Today, if I were to perform some experiments in a set of humans for anemia or fracture or a variety of things, there are lots of complications, lots of ethical considerations. Compared to that, experimentation is much, much easier. The existence of folk and classical traditions is a unique strength of Asia, particularly in India. It's a great thing that we have a Lok Parampara as well as Shastrik Parampara, which can strengthen and reinforce each other. What are the kinds of efforts that we are required if we are to progress towards this? One of the things that we should definitely take up is publication of manuscripts on Vriksha Ayurveda and documentation of folk practices coupled with widespread dissemination. Prachar is what is required. We need pilot projects on testing and validation that can be followed by comprehensive programs on promising leads. Creating a human resource base is also required. For example, I think it will be a good idea to include Vriksha Ayurveda as one of the subjects or papers, not only in agriculture but also in BAMS courses, and see if we can eventually work towards Vriksha Ayurveda as a specialization at the postgraduate level. What are the kinds of returns possible? If we do all this, where do you think it can lead us? It can help us to build towards an agriculture that's based on Vriksha Ayurveda. It can have important implications for medicinal plants cultivation. It can also help towards a new paradigm for agriculture. And let me just spend a couple of minutes on each of these. How can it help sustainable agriculture? Both at the national and global levels, the increase in food production is not keeping pace with increasing global population. The purely chemical approach to agriculture has reached its limits due to problems of sustainability, environmental and health concerns. And there is a global trend towards acceptance of sustainable agriculture, sustainable farming as a way forward. India can emerge very strongly as a global leader, building on indigenous knowledge and wisdom based on Vriksha Ayurveda. The second thing is with respect to medicinal plants cultivation. Where do we get or source medicinal plants that are useful for all our yogas? The era of continuous harvesting of medicinal plants from the wild is drawing to an end, or perhaps already drawn to an end. Ayurveda and traditional medicine industry today has to look towards plantations for future requirements. The government and the society is increasingly telling you that you can't go on unsustainably harvesting forests. Please grow your own plants. How can we grow our own plants? We cannot and should not cultivate medicinal plants with chemical packages using urea, phosphates, and chemical pesticides. A very large number of people are getting to Ayurveda, traditional medicine, drawn from it because they suffered the ill health of chemical lifestyle, whether it's food that's grown chemically or all the chemicals that are ingesting. Last thing you want to hear is that you go to a Vaidya or an Ayurvedic hospital for treatment and they say that the Shatavari or anything else that used to treat you is also grown with chemical pesticides and fertilizers. That just will not do. Ayurveda offers a powerful knowledge base for developing organic packages for cultivation of varied medicinal plants. Lastly, it can give us a new paradigm for agriculture. The reductionist paradigm of modern agriculture, based on nitrogen, phosphorus, and particular chemicals, has severe limitations. Today, organic agriculture is more like a set of recipes. There is no Shastra that's underlying it or behind it. And organic agriculture is badly in search of and seeking a new paradigm. Ayurveda has a powerful theoretical framework that can draw from Panchamahabhut Siddhanta and Tridoshvicha. The theoretical framework of Ayurveda offers a powerful alternative paradigm to comprehend plants and health and disease, as well as understand plant growth. So these are the possibilities that I see. So I'll just close this presentation with two quotations that I found very inspiring. One is by P. Maheshwari, who is one of the greatest botanists of modern India. He gave a very inspiring talk on the title of Plants in Human History more than 50 years back. I think it was given sometime during the Indian Science Congress. And he shares this quote, he shares this statement. In fact, even in the modern world, plant power means as much or more than water power, sea power, atomic energy, and so on. For obtaining plants, men have gone forth with the sword to distant lands, set upon long voyages, and conquered new lands. He then goes on to describe the important role played by plants throughout history: tea, sugarcane, indigo, rubber, cotton, a variety of plants for which people have gone to distant lands and launched voyages. And lastly, there is a beautiful Subhashita sloka which distills the wisdom of our tradition, this aspect of it which says, Amantram aksharam nasti, nasti moolam anoshadam, ayogyo purusho nasti, yojagas tatra durlabhaha. There is no letter that is without the power of a mantra. And similarly, there is no root or plant without medicinal value. So I conclude by saying that we have an extremely rich tradition of Ayurveda that has great implications for human health, for plant health, and animal health. While the major deliberations of the conference of which you are a part, the Ayurveda Conversations, is about Ayurveda in the context of human health. I welcome this opportunity to introduce the audience to one other aspect of our tradition that is very important, but we may not really encounter it very commonly during the course of studies or encounters with Ayurveda. So I'm happy to have had this opportunity, and I'm also delighted that I'm sharing this with an audience which is inspired really by the works of Krishna Kumarji. Krishna Kumarji always showed a very active interest in whatever little efforts we made on Ayurveda, and being very conscious of the fact that I am not myself a Vaidya, and my team really consists of people with background in agriculture other than Vaidya Parampara. He was continuously making efforts to introduce me and to link me with students of Ayurveda as well as the best of the Vaidya Parampara. So thank you very much, and I take leave.